On the stark, snow-covered expanse of Glacier 7, a group of human explorers trudged through the blizzard that swept over the landscape, their vision limited by the howling wind and drifting snow. Led by Captain James Hartford, the team was on a routine survey mission, mapping uncharted territories of this frigid planet. "Visibility's dropping fast, Captain," remarked Lieutenant Mark Davis, peering into his scanner. "We should consider setting up camp soon." James, a seasoned explorer with a keen sense for adventure, nodded in agreement. "Let's push on for another kilometer. There might be a better spot just over that ridge." As the team continued, the youngest member, Ensign Kyle Johnson, stumbled upon something unusual. "Hold up," he called out, brushing away the snow at his feet. "There's something under here." Curious, the team gathered around as Kyle and another explorer, Dr. Sarah Chen, carefully cleared the area. Beneath layers of ice and snow, they uncovered a figure encased in ice, its contours strangely smooth and humanoid. "Is that what I think it is?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Let's find out." "Get the thermal gear," James commanded, his voice firm yet tinged with awe. The team quickly set up their equipment, directing heat to the icy tomb. As the ice melted away, the figure's details became clearer. A female with delicate features, her skin embedded with shimmering bioluminescent veins. "She's not one of us. Not human," murmured Dr. Simon Greer, the biologist. "Look at the luminescence in her skin. Could be some sort of cryoprotective mechanism." Minutes turned to hours as they carefully monitored the thawing process. Finally, the alien's chest rose gently, a faint breath escaping her lips. "She's alive!" exclaimed Kyle, his eyes wide with wonder. James knelt beside her, covering her with his thermal blanket. "Can you hear me?" he asked gently. The alien's eyes fluttered open, revealing iridescent pupils that reflected the team's silhouettes against the snowy backdrop. "I am Eliera," she spoke softly, her voice clear despite her weak state. "Welcome, Eliera. I'm James Hartford, and these are my crew members, Mark, Kyle, and Sarah." "You're safe with us," James reassured her, offering a warm smile. Eliera looked around, her gaze lingering on each face. "Thank you," she replied, her hand reaching out to touch James's arm, her touch surprisingly warm. "What brought you here, Eliera? How did you end up under the ice?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. Eliera's eyes darkened with the memory. "I was scouting this planet for habitable zones when a storm overwhelmed me. I sought shelter and must have succumbed to the cold." "Well, you're with friends now," Mark added, stepping closer with a reassuring nod. Eliera nodded, her expression grateful. "Your kindness is overwhelming. We should move her back to the base." "She needs proper medical attention," Simon suggested pragmatically. James agreed. "All right, team, let's prep the sled. We're heading back. Eliera, you stick with me. We'll make sure you get everything you need to recover fully." As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the site, James stayed by Eliera's side, helping her to her feet. She leaned on him, her body still weak but slowly regaining strength. "This is the beginning of something extraordinary," James thought to himself, as they made their way back to the base under the pale light of Glacier 7's twin moons. The horizon stretched out, a vast field of possibilities, and amidst the cold, a new bond had been forged, one that promised to reshape their understanding of the universe. Chapter 2. Awakening. Back at the base, the team settled Eliera into the medical bay, where Dr. Simon Greer and his assistant, a medic named Alex Torres, took over her care. The warmth of the base contrasted sharply with the biting cold outside, and the hum of machinery filled the air with a comforting sense of security. Captain James Hartford watched over the proceedings, his eyes rarely leaving Eliera as she lay on the cot, her bioluminescent skin dimming and brightening intermittently. "How is she doing, Simon?" James inquired, his tone laced with concern. "She's stable. Her vitals are unlike anything we've seen, but she's responding well to the warmth," Simon reported, checking the readouts on his monitors. "Her body must have some sort of natural antifreeze. Quite fascinating." Iliara's eyes opened slowly, focusing on the faces around her. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "You're safe in our base," James reassured her, stepping closer. "Do you feel strong enough to talk?" Iliara nodded, sitting up gingerly. "Yes, I think so. I want to understand where I am." "You're on Glacier 7, in a human exploration base. We found you frozen in the snow and brought you here to help you recover," explained James. Iliara's expression was one of curiosity mixed with gratitude. "I am in your debt, Captain Hartford and your team. My people. They must be worried." "We can help you contact them if you wish," offered Mark, who had just entered the medical bay with Kyle. "That would be most appreciated," Iliara replied, a look of relief crossing her face. Kyle, eager to make conversation, chimed in. "What's your planet like, Iliara? You know, where you come from. It is very different from here. It's warmer, and the light from our 2 suns never fades. We live in harmony with nature, which is capable of both great beauty and great danger," Iliara shared, her voice tinged with nostalgia. James leaned in, intrigued. "It sounds beautiful. You must miss it." Iliara smiled softly. "I do. But I am also here to learn and explore, just like you." As the group talked, Alex brought in a tray with food and water. "You must be hungry, Iliara. Please eat something," he suggested. Iliara accepted the food with a nod of thanks, sampling it cautiously. "It's good," she declared, much to the relief of everyone around. "Iliara, once you're feeling up to it, we'd like to show you around the base." "There's a lot we can learn from each other," James proposed. "I would like that very much," Iliara agreed, her strength visibly returning. As the conversation flowed, the team and Iliara discussed plans to explore the planet further and exchange knowledge about their respective cultures. The atmosphere in the room was one of mutual fascination and respect, a burgeoning camaraderie forming among them. Simon glanced at James, a smile creeping across his face. "Looks like you've made a new friend, Captain." James returned the smile. "It seems so. But more importantly, we might have made a new ally." The chapter closed with the team, now including Iliara, gathering around a holographic map of Glacier 7, planning their next steps. The air was filled with excitement and the promise of new adventures, as they charted a course not just through the snow-covered landscapes, but also through the realms of interstellar diplomacy and friendship. Chapter 3. Learning to Communicate. In the communal area of the base, a room glowing with screens and soft lights, Captain James Hartford, Lieutenant Mark Davis, and Ensign Kyle Johnson gathered with Iliara to delve into the complexities of interstellar communication. Dr. Simon Greer joined them, intrigued by the potential for new linguistic discoveries. "Let's start with some basics of our languages," James suggested, setting the tone for a collaborative session. "Iliara, could you teach us some simple phrases in your language?" Iliara nodded enthusiastically, her skin subtly glowing in response to the task. "Of course, Captain. Let's begin with greetings. In my language, to say hello, you would say, Lirio." The team repeated after her, trying to mimic the lilting tones of her speech. "Lirio," they chorused, causing Iliara to smile. "Very good. And in return you can say, Kiwi, which means, pleased to meet you," she continued, her voice clear and patient. Mark, always eager to break the ice, grinned. "Kiwi, Iliara. Am I getting it right?" Yes, Mark, that's quite close, Eliera replied, her smile widening. James, intrigued by the physical aspect of their communication, pointed out, I've noticed you use touch, and your skin lights up sometimes when we speak. Does that form part of your language? Eliara's skin shimmered with a pale blue light as she explained. Yes, in Arctron culture, touch and light signals are as important as vocal sounds. They convey emotion and emphasis. Simon leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Could you give us an example of how you might use touch in communication? Eliera reached out and gently placed her hand on Kyle's arm, her fingertips glowing softly. This gesture, she said, is a way of expressing trust and sincerity. Kyle looked at her hand, fascinated by the warm light. It's like your body speaks as well, he observed. Yes, exactly, Eliera agreed. Our communication is multisensory. James suggested a practical application. Let's try constructing a sentence with what we've learned. How would we say, "We come in peace," in your language? Eliera taught them each word, correcting their pronunciation gently. Vi narrows qui venel. They practiced several times, laughter filling the room as they stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds. After they had mastered the phrase, Eliera showed them how to accompany the words with a hand gesture that involved an open palm toward the listener, which symbolized peace. As the session progressed, the team felt a growing sense of accomplishment and camaraderie. They shared stories from Earth and asked Eliera about her home planet, each tale bringing them closer. Toward the end of the lesson, James proposed, "Let's document these lessons. Kyle, you have some experience with video editing. Can we record our sessions?" Kyle nodded, excited by the prospect. "Absolutely, Captain. It would be great to have a record of our progress, and it could help future missions." The group agreed, and they set up a small recording station in the corner of the room. As they concluded their first recorded session, James looked around at his team and their new alien friend, feeling a profound sense of unity. "Today we've taken a small step in understanding each other," he said, his gaze meeting each of their eyes. "And that's a big leap for all of us." The team nodded in agreement, each feeling the weight and the thrill of the journey they were on together. As they wrapped up, they were not just a group of humans and an alien. They were a team, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead on Glacier 7, united by their newfound ability to communicate. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. As the Glacier 7 base hummed with the routine activities of daily life, an urgent alert from the planetary weather system interrupted the tranquility. The screens flashed with warnings of an approaching superstorm, more severe than anything the team had encountered since their arrival. Captain James Hartford, together with his core team, Lieutenant Mark Davis, Ensign Kyle Johnson, and Dr. Simon Greer, gathered in the command center to strategize their response. Eliera stood beside James, her expression serious, as she observed the data flickering across the monitors. "Looks like we're in for a rough ride," Mark commented, analyzing the storm patterns. "This one could last for days based on these readings." James nodded, his eyes fixed on the swirling mass depicted on the screen. "We need to secure the base. Eliera, you've experienced these conditions before. Any advice?" Eliera approached the console, her fingers gliding over the digital images of cloud formations and wind speeds. "These storms can be unpredictable, but your base will need reinforcement against the winds and heavy snow. My people use a gel-like substance that hardens instantly to protect our structures. Do we have anything like that?" James asked, turning to Simon. Simon thought for a moment. "We might be able to replicate a temporary sealant with the polymers we have. It won't be as advanced as Eliara's description, but it should help." Kyle chimed in. "What about supplies? Should we ration our energy usage?" "Yes, excellent point," James agreed. "Let's conserve as much power as possible and make sure all emergency systems are fully charged. The team split up to implement their tasks. James and Eliera focused on securing the base's exterior. They worked side by side, applying the polymer sealant along the edges of windows and doorways, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Mark and Kyle took on the responsibility of checking the power systems and backup generators, ensuring they were operational and efficiently fueled. They moved through the mechanical bay with practiced ease, double-checking connections and fuel levels. Inside, Simon organized the medical supplies and emergency kits, distributing them throughout the base to ensure easy access in case the storm caused any injuries. As the winds began to howl outside, signaling the storm's imminent arrival, the team regrouped in the main living area. James looked around at his crew, their faces lit by the soft glow of emergency lights. "We've done all we can to prepare," James said, his voice steady despite the rising noise of the wind outside. "Now, we wait it out together. Keep to the safety protocols we've set up, and we'll get through this." Eliera, now fully a part of the team, added, "In my culture, we believe that facing a storm together strengthens the bonds between us. Let us draw strength from each other." The team nodded, feeling the weight of her words. As the storm raged outside, they shared stories of Earth and Eliara's planet, their laughter mingling with the sound of the wind against the reinforced walls. Kyle, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "After this, a regular snowstorm on Earth will feel like a breeze." Mark laughed, clapping him on the back. "That's the spirit, Kyle. We'll hold you to that next time we're back home facing a winter storm." As the night progressed, the storm outside peaked in intensity, but inside, the warmth of camaraderie and shared purpose kept the cold at bay. Each member of the team took turns monitoring the storm's progress and the base's systems, working together to ensure their safety and the integrity of their temporary home on Glacier 7. By facing the storm not just as colleagues but as companions, they forged a deeper connection, one that would be vital for the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Touch of Warmth. The superstorm had passed, leaving Glacier 7's snowy landscape reshaped under its fierce winds. Towering drifts surrounded the base, glinting under the pale light of the planet's twin moons. Inside the base, the team worked to restore normalcy. James Hartford and Eliera volunteered to lead a scouting mission to assess the storm's aftermath and ensure their surroundings were safe. Lieutenant Mark Davis joined them, carrying a portable scanner to check for structural damage and potential hazards. "I've calibrated this thing to pick up on any underground instability," he said, slinging the device over his shoulder. "Good thinking, Mark," James replied, slipping on his insulated gloves. "Let's move out." Eliera, now fully integrated into the team's routines, walked beside James. She glanced at him as they stepped into the crisp, frozen air. "Your preparedness impresses me, Captain. It's a quality we value deeply among my people." James smiled at her. "We've learned the hard way that being prepared saves lives out here. Besides, teamwork makes it easier." Mark smirked. "Just make sure this teamwork doesn't get us stuck in another snowdrift, Captain. I still haven't forgotten the last time." The three of them shared a laugh, their breath fogging in the frigid air as they trudged through the snow. The landscape had transformed into a maze of icy formations, glittering like crystal sculptures. They moved cautiously, Mark scanning for potential hazards. "Over here," he called out, stopping at a cluster of jagged ice. "The storm must have revealed this. Looks like an underground cavern entrance." Eliera crouched beside the opening, running her fingers over the icy edge. Her skin glimmered faintly in the dim light. "This isn't natural," she said. "It's too smooth, too precise. This was made intentionally." James knelt beside her, peering into the shadowy depths. "Could be a structure buried beneath the ice. We'll need more equipment to explore safely." Mark pulled out his scanner and directed it toward the cavern. Getting some unusual readings. High density, likely metallic. Whatever's down there isn't just rock and ice. James nodded, making a mental note of their findings. We'll mark the location and return with the full team. Let's finish our sweep for now. As they continued their patrol, the wind picked up slightly, and the temperature dropped further. James noticed Eliera shivering despite her thick clothing. "You're cold," he said, concern evident in his voice. "My physiology is not as adapted to prolonged exposure to such extreme cold," Eliera admitted, her tone steady despite her discomfort. James immediately stepped closer, unfastening his thermal jacket and draping it over her shoulders. "Here. You need this more than I do." Eliera looked up at him, her iridescent eyes shimmering. "Your kindness is remarkable, James. Among my people, such gestures are considered sacred bonds of trust." "It's not about trust. It's about looking out for each other," James replied, his voice soft but firm. "Out here, we survive as a team." Mark, a few steps ahead, grinned over his shoulder. "You're setting a high bar for chivalry, Captain." Eliera adjusted the jacket and gave James a faint smile. "You are very different from what I imagined humans to be. There is a warmth in you, a light that shines even in the cold." James felt a faint blush rise to his cheeks. "We're not so different, Eliera. Just trying to do what's right." As they made their way back to the base, the glow of the structure came into view, a welcome beacon after hours in the freezing wilderness. Inside, they found the rest of the team busy repairing equipment and cataloging data. Later that evening, as the crew gathered for a meal, James and Eliera found themselves seated beside each other. The atmosphere was lively, with Mark regaling the group with tales of their scouting trip. Eliera turned to James, her voice quiet amid the noise. "Today, I felt a bond that I have not felt since leaving my homeworld. Your actions reminded me of what it means to connect, even across vast differences." James met her gaze, his tone equally soft. "It means a lot to hear you say that. Out here, we need all the connection we can get." Her bioluminescent skin glowed faintly as she reached out and placed her hand on his. "Thank you, James, for your warmth, both physical and emotional." The touch was gentle, her fingertips surprisingly warm. James didn't pull away. Instead, he gave her hand a slight squeeze. "We're in this together, Eliera." The moment lingered, the noise of the room fading into the background. Their connection, born in the icy expanse of an alien world, deepened in the quiet warmth of that shared moment. As the night wore on, the storm's aftermath felt less like a trial and more like a chapter of discovery. About each other, about themselves, and about the bonds that could form even in the harshest of places. Chapter 6. Unseen Boundaries. Life at the glacier, 7 Base settled into a routine after the storm, but tensions quietly brewed beneath the surface. Not everyone in the crew was as welcoming of Eliera as James and his closest teammates. Whispers spread in the hallways, doubts about her intentions and the risks of trusting an alien so openly. In the command center, James, Mark, and Kyle were discussing the next steps for exploring the cavern they had discovered. Eliera stood nearby, studying a holographic map of the surrounding area. "We'll need to bring additional lighting equipment and stronger harnesses," Mark said. "The ice near the entrance looks unstable." "I agree," James added, marking locations on the map. "We can't take any risks with the team's safety." Kyle glanced at Eliera, lowering his voice slightly. "Do you think it's wise to involve her? Some people are still uneasy about having her around." James's expression hardened. "She's proven herself, Kyle. Eliera's insights have been invaluable." We wouldn't have even identified that cavern without her. Kyle hesitated but nodded. Fair enough. Just people talk, you know. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Let them talk. She's part of this team now, and we're stronger for it. Eliara, sensing the unease in Kyle's tone, turned toward them. If my presence is causing discord among your crew, I can step back. The last thing I wish is to create division. No, James said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. You're not stepping back. You've earned your place here, Eliara. Mark crossed his arms, leaning against the console. Captain's right. If anyone has a problem, they can take it up with us. Eliara gave a small nod, her bioluminescent skin dimming slightly. Thank you, all of you. I will do my best to prove myself further. The tension lingered, but the conversation shifted back to the mission. After finalizing their preparations, the team broke off to gather supplies. James and Eliara walked together toward the equipment room. I can sense the unease, Eliara said quietly. It's different from the harmony we value in my culture. There's conflict here, even if it's unspoken. James stopped and turned to face her. Not everyone adapts to change easily. For some, it's fear of the unknown. But that doesn't mean they won't come around. Eliara looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You believe they will accept me? I do, James said with conviction. They just need time to see what I see. Later that day, as the crew worked on loading the exploration gear, the unease became more apparent. Private conversations fell silent whenever Eliara entered a room, and a few crew members exchanged uneasy glances. James noticed but chose to address it in his own way, by openly involving Eliara in every decision. During one of these moments, while configuring the communication equipment, Mark spoke up loud enough for others to hear. Hey, Eliara, you've got a good eye for detail. Can you double-check these calibrations? Eliara stepped forward, inspecting the device. The frequency modulation seems slightly off. May I adjust it? Go ahead, Mark replied with a smile, making sure others saw the exchange. Gradually, some of the crew began to soften, though pockets of distrust remained. That evening, James called a meeting to address the elephant in the room. All right, let's get this out in the open, he began, standing at the front of the communal area. Some of you have concerns about Eliara. I want to hear them, but I also want to make one thing clear. She's part of this team. A murmur spread through the group before Private Lorne, one of the mechanics, spoke up. It's not personal, Captain. It's just, we don't know her. What if her people see us as a threat? Eliara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. My people value life and knowledge. I was sent here to explore, not to harm. I understand your fear, but I am here to help, not to endanger you. James added, she's already proved her value. She's shared her knowledge, helped us through the storm, and contributed to our mission. If anyone still doubts her intentions, let's settle it now. Silence filled the room as the crew processed his words. Finally, Lorne nodded reluctantly. All right, Captain. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. As the crew dispersed, James caught up with Eliara in the corridor. That took courage, he said. Standing up like that. It was necessary, she replied, her bioluminescence faintly glowing. I want to belong here, James. Among your people. You already do, James said, his voice soft. And with time, everyone will see it. Eliara's lips curled into a small smile. Thank you. For standing by me. That's what teammates do, James said, his hand brushing hers briefly. The contact lingered for a moment before they continued walking, a quiet understanding passing between them. The day ended with the crew more united, their shared goal of exploration beginning to dissolve the remaining boundaries. Though trust was not yet complete, it was growing, like a fragile flame, needing only time and care to thrive. Chapter 7. The Confluence. The cavern beneath the snow was a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The team prepared their equipment carefully, ensuring every precaution was taken. James Hartford led the expedition, accompanied by Eliera, Lieutenant Mark Davis, and Ensign Kyle Johnson. The air was charged with excitement as they ventured back to the icy opening they had discovered. "Let's double-check the harnesses," Mark said, tugging at the straps on his gear. "The last thing we need is someone taking an unintended dive." "Good call," James agreed, pulling on his gloves. "Eliera, you okay with the descent?" "I am ready," Eliera replied, her glowing skin faintly illuminating the surrounding snow. "This is an opportunity to understand both this place and each other better." Kyle adjusted his helmet, shooting her a grin. "Just don't show us up too much down there, okay? We humans have fragile egos." Eliera tilted her head, her smile soft. "I will try to tread lightly, Kyle." The group descended one by one into the cavern, their harnesses sliding smoothly along the guide ropes. The icy walls glistened, reflecting the faint glow of Eliera's bioluminescence and the artificial light of their equipment. When they reached the bottom, a strange metallic structure came into view, partially embedded in the icy floor. "Whoa!" Kyle breathed, stepping closer. "This definitely isn't natural." Mark crouched beside the structure, running a gloved hand over its smooth surface. "It's some kind of alloy, nothing like what we've seen before." James examined the markings etched into the metal, patterns that seemed to shift under the light. "Eliera, does this look familiar to you?" Eliera knelt beside him, tracing the markings with her fingers. Her skin glowed brighter as she concentrated. "These patterns are similar to ancient designs from my world, but they are not identical. It suggests an older origin, perhaps shared across civilizations." "Shared?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed. "You mean your people and someone else?" "Possibly," Eliera said. "Or perhaps a precursor civilization that influenced us both." "This is significant." Kyle activated his scanner, the screen lighting up with data. "I'm picking up faint energy readings. Whatever this thing is, it's not completely dormant." James stood and addressed the group. "Let's document everything. Photos, scans, samples. This could be a game-changer." As they worked, the camaraderie between them deepened. Mark and Kyle shared jokes to lighten the mood, while Eliera and James collaborated on deciphering the markings. Eliera's knowledge provided valuable context, but it was James's intuition that helped connect the dots. "Here," James said, pointing to a section of the pattern. "This symbol looks like it could represent movement, maybe a hinge or a doorway." Eliera nodded, her expression brightening. "You could be correct. If we apply pressure here, it might activate something." Mark and Kyle exchanged a glance. "Are we sure we want to mess with this?" Kyle asked. "I mean, it's cool and all, but what if it blows up?" James smirked. "Then we'll know not to touch it next time." Eliera placed her hand on the marked section, her glowing fingers aligning with the patterns. "Together," she said, looking at James. He placed his hand beside hers, their movements synchronized. A low hum vibrated through the cavern as the markings began to light up, spreading outward in a cascade of energy. The group stepped back as a section of the structure shifted, revealing an opening. "Well, that's not terrifying at all," Kyle muttered, though his eyes shone with excitement. Inside, the chamber was unlike anything they had imagined. Crystalline structures lined the walls, pulsing faintly with light. In the center, a pedestal held a small, glowing orb. James approached cautiously. "This looks important." Eliara studied the orb, her expression thoughtful. "It is a core of knowledge. Such devices were said to hold the wisdom of an ancient race." Mark raised an eyebrow. "And what happens if we take it?" "Let's not find out just yet," James said, holding up a hand. "We need to study this more before making any moves." The group carefully documented the chamber, their excitement tempered by caution. As they prepared to leave, Eliara turned to James. "You were right to approach this with care. Your instincts are admirable." James smiled at her. "We make a good team." As they ascended back to the surface, the group's bond felt stronger than ever. The discoveries they had made were monumental, but the sense of trust and unity they shared was equally significant. That evening, back at the base, the team gathered around a holographic projection of the chamber. The tension that had lingered among some crew members seemed to have melted away in the face of their shared achievement. "You know," Kyle said, leaning back in his chair, "this might just be the coolest thing I've ever been part of." Mark clapped him on the shoulder. "And it's only the beginning." Eliara looked around at the group, her luminous eyes reflecting the glow of the hologram. "This discovery is not just about knowledge. It is about connection, between worlds, between people." James met her gaze, his voice quiet but firm. "And we're just getting started." The room filled with a hum of conversation and plans for future exploration, but James and Eliara shared a quiet moment, their connection deepening with each passing day. They had bridged gaps once thought insurmountable, and together they were carving a path into the unknown. Chapter 8. Beneath the Endless Sky. The glow of the orb from the ancient chamber had stayed with the team, a reminder of the mysteries they had uncovered. Days after their initial discovery, Captain James Hartford gathered his core team: Eliara, Lieutenant Mark Davis, Ensign Kyle Johnson, and Dr. Simon Greer, in the command center to discuss their next steps. "We've barely scratched the surface of what we found," James began, standing before the holographic display of the crystalline chamber. "But this isn't just about us anymore. This discovery could have implications far beyond Glacier 7. Mark nodded, arms crossed. "Agreed, but we have to tread carefully. Whatever that orb holds, it's not just a relic. It's alive in some way." Simon chimed in, his tone cautious. "The readings we've gathered suggest it's a repository of information, but we can't predict how accessing it might affect the surrounding environment, or us." Kyle leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk on his face. "So, the question is, do we leave it here or take the risk?" Eliara, standing beside James, stepped forward. "Among my people, such artifacts are treated with great respect. It is believed they hold not only knowledge but also the intentions of those who created them. If we take it, we must do so with purpose." James met her gaze, the weight of the decision clear in his expression. "Then we need to decide what that purpose is." The room fell silent as the team considered their options. Finally, Mark broke the quiet. "If we're going to make this call, we need to do it together. No half measures." James nodded. "Agreed. Let's take one more trip to the chamber. We'll study it further and decide from there." The descent into the cavern felt different this time. The group moved with a sense of shared determination, their steps synchronized. When they reached the chamber, the crystalline walls pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging their presence. James led the way to the pedestal, the orb casting a soft light across his face. "Eliara, you said this might hold the intentions of its creators. Do you think they meant for it to be found?" Eliara studied the orb, her bioluminescent skin glowing faintly in response. "Perhaps. Such creations are rarely accidental. They are meant to bridge gaps, to guide those who come after. Mark glanced at the walls. And yet, no instructions. Just a glowing ball of mystery. Kyle chuckled nervously. Maybe that's the point. Figuring it out is the test. James rested his hand on the edge of the pedestal. Eliera, if we take this, what do you think will happen? Eliera hesitated, her gaze steady. I cannot say for certain, but I feel it is waiting for someone to act, to carry it forward. James looked at each member of his team, their faces lit by the orb's glow. This isn't just my call. We're in this together. Mark stepped forward first. I say we take it. But we do it knowing there's no going back. Kyle nodded. I'm with Mark. It's risky, but leaving it here feels wrong. Simon frowned, but eventually relented. If we're careful, we might be able to unlock its secrets without harming ourselves, or this planet. Finally, James turned to Eliera. Your opinion matters most. What do you think? Eliera's luminous eyes met his. I believe we were meant to find this, and I believe it will reveal its purpose when the time is right. James exhaled deeply, then reached out, his hand hovering over the orb. All right, let's do this. When his fingers made contact with the orb, the chamber lit up, the crystalline walls shimmering like a living aurora. The hum of energy filled the air, and the patterns on the orb began to shift, forming symbols that mirrored those on the walls. What's happening? Kyle asked, his voice a mix of awe and nervousness. Eliera stepped closer, her skin glowing brighter in harmony with the orb. It's responding. It recognizes us. As the light intensified, the orb projected a series of images into the air. A star map, a structure resembling the cavern, and finally, the outlines of figures that looked eerily familiar to both humans and Arcturans. James's voice was barely above a whisper. It's a guide. Eliera nodded, her expression reverent. To something greater. A place where our worlds may intersect. The orb dimmed slightly, its energy stabilizing as James removed it from the pedestal. The chamber's glow receded, leaving the group standing in silence, the weight of their discovery settling over them. Back at the base, the team carefully secured the orb in a containment unit, its light now faint but steady. Over a quiet meal, they reflected on the day's events. So, what now? Kyle asked, breaking the silence. James leaned back in his chair. Now, we take this one step at a time. We study it, learn from it, and see where it leads us. Mark raised his glass. To the craziest expedition I've ever been on. The team laughed, the tension easing. As the conversation turned to lighter topics, James and Eliera found themselves seated apart from the group, their voices low. You trusted me, Eliera said, her hand resting on the table near his. Even when others hesitated. James looked at her, his expression soft. It wasn't just trust. It was belief. In you. In us. Eliera's bioluminescent veins shimmered faintly as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. And I believe in you, James. For a moment, the noise of the room faded, leaving only the quiet connection between them. Beneath the endless sky of Glacier 7, they had found something unexpected, an understanding that transcended worlds. Their journey wasn't over, but they would face whatever came next together, united by a bond that had grown stronger with every step.